Welcome, everybody. My name is Dave Zapponi, and I'm the CEO of ECHO, otherwise known as the Educational Council of Homeowners. I want to thank you for participating in this community conversation, environmentally friendly landscaping. ECHO is a statewide nonprofit association established to support HOA board members and engaged homeowners. Our mission is to foster a better quality of life in community associations through advocacy, education, and connections. For today's event, we have a few housekeeping items. These are now being presented on the screen. In addition, slides were sent to registered attendees beforehand. Please take a moment to review our housekeeping items. We have many HOA board members in attendance today, which usually means a lot of questions. We will do our best to answer them. Please use the Q&A icon, the question and answer icon, not the chat icon, to ask your questions or make comments. You can use the chat icon to report technical issues and to communicate directly with other participants in the webinar. You will find these navigation tools by hovering over the bar at the bottom of the page. I will respond in writing to some questions in the Q&A feature during the presentation. All other questions will be answered during the presentation, after each section, and during the Q&A section at the end of the seminar. Please keep your questions general in nature. Questions about specific situations are best asked one-on-one with your professional. To help us select the most relevant questions, please use the thumbs up icon found on the Q&A screen in the bottom left corner. Simply click this upvote icon to select your favorite questions. And now for our disclaimer, which you'll find on your screen. None of what is said during the seminar shall be construed as specific legal or expert advice from the speaker, sponsor, or ECHO. If you wish specific advice, we encourage you to contact your attorney or another suitable expert. Thank you. Today, we have several sponsors. Please join me in thanking our premier sponsor, the Kevin Boland Insurance Agency. The program sponsor is Silver Creek Association Management. Our Q&A session sponsors are Land Design, Construction, and Maintenance, and Monster Tree Services. Today's registration sponsor is Levy Erlinger and Company, CPAs, and Silver Creek Association Management. Now we will have a few words from our premier sponsor, the Kevin Boland Insurance Agency.
Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Boland and I'm a farmer's insurance agent based in our beautiful San Francisco Bay Area. So I am very happy again this year to be a premier sponsor for ECHO. You know, I've learned so much in the last 7 years, it really feels good to give back. And I also serve on my board and we have 214 homes. And one of the problems we're facing right now is that we have a lot of plants and a lot of trees and our water usage bill is high. So I'm looking forward today to learn how we can become more environmentally sensitive, but at the same time, learn how we can manage our water usage bill. So thank everybody. And of course, if anybody has any insurance questions, or if you would like a professional bid on your association's insurance, please give me a call. I continue to get fantastic rates with Farmers Insurance.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate your support. We always appreciate your support and your knowledge about insurance. Thank you so much. We will also be giving away 3 $50 gift cards courtesy of our gift card sponsors, Botanicon, Land Design, Construction and Maintenance, and Silver Creek Association Management. We are mixing things up a bit today. Winners will be selected from participants who have submitted a question during any of the question and answer portions of today's webinar. As usual, you must stay until the end of the presentation to claim your prize. You must also be present to claim your prize. Thank you to our sponsors. They make this event affordable for all. Introduction of session number 1. We will now move into our planned presentation for the day presented by Tiffany Falstich of Botanicon. Tiffany brings horticulture expertise and contractor know-how to the roles of landscape vendor management and quality assurance. She has been in California landscape in the California landscape industry for more than 20 years and is a respected college and quail instructor. Tiffany, please begin your presentation. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Dave, for having me. I'm really grateful to be here and share some food for thought with everyone. And at my request, I said, let's make this a real interactive discussion. And as a result, we've broken up the slides, and there's really not a ton of slides. I'm going to give you some information, and then we're going to have a pause where we can answer questions based on the selected topic that revolved around those, that was the topic of those slides. And the goal is really to meet your needs and answer questions regarding your landscaping and renovations that you may be potentially considering within your community. And what I want to start with is why we would even consider doing renovations, right? What is the main driving force of our renovations right now in California? I think someone could probably type that into the Q&A, and that would qualify you for a gift card at the end. What would be the main driving force of renovations in California today? Why would you want to do landscape renovations? All right, I already have the correct answer several times over. Yay! Drought, okay? What you're seeing on the screen here, before we even get started, I wanted to give you some food for thought as to why you would be doing these renovations. I want you to take note of the U.S. Drought Monitor for the state of California and note the date. This is Thursday, April 28th, released once a week. And it measures the level of drought throughout the state. April, we're in a drought, okay? The hills should be green everywhere around us. Our reservoirs should be full. We are in a really bad place right now in California. Most of the state is in either a severe, which is orange, or an extreme drought, which is red. Very bottom of California is only in a moderate drought, and the very top of California is in a moderate drought. Everywhere else is in severe to extreme drought. And this is April, people. It is only going to get worse. So we need to do renovations in our communities. There's no more waiting. We can't table this for another year. We need to start thinking about what we're going to do in our communities, how we're going to do it, how we're going to fund it, and when we're going to start to take action, because the drought is not going away. One thing that I noticed in the news yesterday, and if some of you have already heard this, this isn't new news to you, but the MWD, which is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which serves, basically from Ventura, maybe part of Santa Barbara County, all the way down to the border, delivers water down there. They are imposing restrictions in portions of their service area, Los Angeles County, Ventura County, and portions of San Bernardino County, to watering once a week. Okay. Once a week, starting in June. Their municipal water providers are going to be responsible for enforcing that in those jurisdictions. But 1 day per week is not much. And just to let you know, the peak watering month, the peak demand for plants in the landscape is July. Okay, so we're coming into our peak irrigation months, our peak water demand months for plants. And portions of the state, about 6 million people served in these areas, are going to be restricted to watering their irrigation watering their plant material once per week. So we're at a point where we really don't have a choice anymore. We need to start thinking about how and what we're going to be doing within our communities. So I wanted to make you aware of that, and you can Google this and find more information about this unprecedented water restriction of 1 day per week. But I thought it would be nice to kind of start our discussion with that and frame why we would want to be doing some renovations within our community. There are lots of other reasons to be doing renovations. Plant material has a useful life. Okay, so everything has a lifespan, including plant materials. And if you have communities that have aging landscape, or portions of the community that has aging landscape, it's more susceptible to diseases and pests. Maybe it's a very high maintenance landscape. Maybe it's a very high water usage landscape. Maybe it's plants that just never took off in an area. There's lots of other reasons, but really we're focused on drought right now. So simplifying some of these renovations. And again, this is going to be an interactive discussion. I'm really going to talk on 5 main topics that I think are important for communities to look at when you're looking at doing renovations in a community. And we're kind of in the planning phase right now. Planting or putting plants in the ground, best time to do that is in late fall to early winter. So we're talking like November, early December. So we're in end of April, we're in May. We can really start planning right now in order to plant new landscaping and new plant materials in our communities in late fall or early winter. So we've kind of gotten to a point where we have about 6 months of time to do this planning, and what are the things that we should really plan for and look at in renovations. And these are not mutually exclusive. These are not the only things. These are just 5 things that I thought would be important to communities when starting their planning process in hopes of getting something in the ground in late fall. And I like to use an analogy of planting a landscape. It's like baking a cake. Okay, so when you go and you want to bake a cake for someone, you find a recipe, you go to the grocery store, you buy the ingredients, you bring the ingredients home and you mix them, you put them in the oven, you bake the cake, you let it cool, you put the cake together, and then you frost it and decorate it. Okay, that's the big wow factor. The planting is the big wow factor when we're talking about landscape renovations. But right now we're in the planning phase. We're in the gathering our recipe and our shopping and our mixing ingredients phase. And come late fall, early winter, we actually frost the cake, and we frost it with our landscape plant selection, the plants that we're going to put in the landscape, the wow factor. But there are things that we need to do ahead of time and things that we need to plan for in order to make our landscape successful when we finally do get it in the ground. So that's really my approach here, is to give you some food for thought on what to plan for. Number 1 is stormwater retention. The goal of stormwater retention is to use what rainfall we do get and be able to keep it on site to the biggest extent possible. And we want to be able to recharge our groundwater on our sites and reduce stormwater runoff. Think of your entire community, as well as common spaces in your community, as well as residential properties on your community, as mini watersheds. Water falls onto your property and then it leaves the property via a stormwater drain system generally. We want to think of it as a mini watershed. We want that rain to come on our site, to come on our community areas, to fall onto our residential properties, and we want to keep as much of that on site as possible. Conventional wisdom or decades old wisdom was get it off site and get it into the sewer system and get rid of it. We're not at a point where we can afford to waste that water anymore. We need to be able to look at our sites and determine if, how, and where we can capture this water and recharge the groundwater or store that water for later use, because we need that water. If we have the ability to store water or recharge our groundwater, we potentially don't have to turn our irrigation controller on until June instead of March. That's 3 whole months where we don't have to use potable water. We don't have to use drinking water to irrigate our landscape. We can delay the start of irrigation season. Another reason is pollution in the stormwater runoff. Water that goes into the stormwater system, it carries brake dust, it carries gasoline, it carries oil, it carries garbage, cigarette butts, pesticides, fertilizers, and it all goes out to the ocean eventually. One way or another, gets into the storm drain system, gets into our creeks, gets into our rivers, and makes its way out into the ocean. So really looking at our job sites as mini watersheds, or our project sites as mini watersheds, and keeping that water on site to the biggest extent possible will conserve our irrigation water resources and give us a cleaner stormwater runoff where we're not sending as much into the stormwater system, and what does get sent down there is a cleaner form. There's a saying called slow it, spread it, sink it, and that means we want to slow that water as it's coming onto our communities. We want to spread it out over the soil. We want to let it sink back into the groundwater. How do we do that? There's a couple things that we want to do initially when we're looking at doing a landscape renovation. And always the first part of a landscape renovation is kind of removal and grading, moving soil around on a project site. This is the perfect time to think about stormwater retention, is prior to doing this kind of grading and plant removal, because we can look at our site and we can conduct an analysis and we can say, well, what type of soil do we have, and what is the capacity for drainage on our community common area? Where are the structures located within our community? Where is the water coming from? Is it coming from roofs? Is it coming from hard surfaces and concrete? Is it coming from downspouts? And then where is it going? Is it potentially flooding an area? Is it going straight out into the stormwater system? Is there a way we could collect that water and move it to another location in the landscape as opposed to sending it down the drain? And then also looking at where we have mature plantings and trees that we want to keep in our renovation area. We may not be wanting to remove all plant material. We want to keep selected trees, and we want to keep selected mature woody shrubs because they're doing well and they're low water use already. And so we don't want to inundate those with water. So we do what's called a site analysis and kind of analyze all of those factors to determine if and where we can store our water on site. And then within a renovation, we want to plan that area to include detention basins and swales and places where we can keep that water on site. My favorite way to do that is utilizing contours and topography. So that means grading and moving soil around, maybe bringing soil in to give some depth and some elevation to a common area or an entrance, and utilize those contours and topography changes to redirect water into the ground and store it for later use. Another way to implement some stormwater retention features within a renovation is looking at any access pathways that you may have in your community that are in a landscape renovation area, and choose something other than concrete or asphalt or something impermeable, because that's where water always runs off. So if we have access pathways that need to be rebuilt within our community, look at using just plain mulch for pathways, or look at using decomposed granite for pathways, or look at using permeable pavers, which have, they're actual pavers, but they have a very large joint space in between them, larger than normal. And they're filled with a special type of gravel, and it allows the water to percolate in between those pavers and soak back into the groundwater and not run off of the project site. So here are a couple ways to think about stormwater retention within a specific project area. Rain barrels and cisterns. So private residential people can have rain barrels and store rain in their rain barrels and use it later in their own private residence. Larger communities may look into cisterns and storing water in larger volumes to, again, delay when you turn your irrigation timers on. You can push it back to June or maybe July and use that rainwater that you have stored. You can collect a tremendous amount of rain, even in some of the low rainfall areas of California. It's pretty surprising when you do the calculations, how much rainfall you can collect and store and eventually use, even with only 6 or 8 inches of rainfall a year. Looking at pathways that are permeable and not concrete or asphalt, and then using topsoil and grading changes and contouring the landscape to redirect water to appropriate areas in the site where it will soak into the ground and be used later by existing plant material or mature plants. Using vegetated swales, and those are areas in the landscape that are planted with the specific purpose of it being a low point where water will collect and percolate back down into the groundwater. You can have even seasonally dry creek beds, and then that permeable pavement with the large joint space. This is an example of a vegetated swale that is adjacent to a road. You'll notice on this project in particular, there's no curb and gutter. That is the standard old way of thinking of removing that stormwater offsite and getting rid of it. Whereas more new construction, this is what you're going to see, is no curb and gutter and some sort of permeable pavement adjacent to a vegetated swale where water that does eventually run off of any of these hard surfaces and maybe doesn't percolate in the permeable pavement goes into this vegetated swale and percolates back down into the groundwater instead of being carried off in the stormwater system. There are lots of opportunities in landscape renovations to do this on project sites. And again, kind of a key takeaway, I think, is with stormwater retention is thinking of every project that you do as a mini watershed. How can I keep that water on site? And can I, is the first question, do a site analysis. Can I keep it on site? Do I have a large enough area that's away from structures to redirect water into the ground? And that mini watershed kind of frame of mind is going to help you when you're planning your projects, because believe it or not, even some of the smaller areas, you still can detain stormwater and defray it from going into the stormwater system. So any questions on stormwater retention? So this is going to be our first question break on the topic of stormwater retention. I'm going to scroll through some of the questions and see if we have any questions related to stormwater retention. I have some questions here that are not related to stormwater management, and at the end I'll go back and answer those. I see one on recycled water, restrictions with recycled water. So we're talking purple pipe water. The only restriction, this is Maureen's question. She says, we use recycled water. Do you know of any restrictions that we may encounter? Not to my knowledge with retaining that on site. That would be more irrigation water versus storm water. Recycled water, you just can't grow food on it, is really the main restriction. It's strictly used for landscaping purposes. So that's semi-related to a stormwater question. We have questions on plant choices, cohesive design. So a lot of these I will get to later when we move on to those topics. Watering once a week. Okay. So I'm going to keep all of these questions here And I don't see any on the topic of stormwater retention. Oh, wait, how does stormwater retention work on condo high rises? Really good question. So if you don't have a footprint of land, this is from Wolfram, he says, or he or she says, I'm not sure. How does stormwater retention work on condo high rises? So the best way to keep your stormwater retained on site and use it is probably catchment via a rain barrel or cistern, unless you have some sort of green roof on top of your condo high rise. Condo high rises, I don't think of as having a very large landscaping footprint. It's on probably a small site, so you don't, unless you have a lot of land to work with, you're really limited to the rain barrel and cistern catchment. You'll see new high rises and new condos that have a very small landscaping area. The building footprint takes up most of the land. They're being designed and built with green roofs on them. So the green roofs actually will absorb that stormwater that would normally be falling on a roof and normally be flowing into the stormwater system. So rain barrels would be the way for you to do that. Some municipalities even give rebates for rain barrels to their customers. Every municipality is a little bit different, so you would want to check with your municipality if you get a rain barrel rebate. Please cover how to store without drawing mosquitoes. Good question, Teresa. That is, you have to keep your rain barrels covered. If you're talking rain barrels and cisterns, they have to have a lid that covers them because you don't want to draw mosquitoes into them. And then if you're talking about swales and vegetated areas in the landscape where you're allowing water to percolate into the ground, that's where the site analysis comes in, and you learn, you want to learn about the soil type that you have and what's called the drawdown potential, which is the drainage and how quickly that water will drain through the top layer of your vegetated swale. That's something where you probably really need to consult a landscape architect on, and there's some calculations involved with that. They'll come out and they'll take soil samples. They'll tell you what kind of soil you have, and they'll calculate the drawdown potential or how quickly that water moves through the soil. You may need to have different type of soil brought in. You may need to have a overflow drain. So there are all kinds of engineering options available for those large vegetated swales, depending on the type of soil that you have. So I would definitely consult with your landscape architect on that. That was a really good question. Tips or ideas on how to save storm water retaining in common areas. Thank you, Art Alfaro, for asking that question. So kind of what I was showing with the image of the contours in the landscape and redirecting that water to areas where it can sink back into the ground. Doing those site analysis first so you can understand where your buildings are, where your mature plants are, and where the best location in the landscape would be to put those contours to redirect the water to a desirable area. A non-desirable area to store water in a vegetated swale or with contours would be next to a building, right? You don't want an accumulation of water next to a building. You don't want an accumulation of water next to a 100-year-old oak tree. So those are some examples of doing a site analysis and determining on your site specifically if and where within your common area is the best place to change the contours of the landscape to redirect that water. And when you're starting to look at large common areas, you really probably want to get involved with the landscape architect to help you do some of that. So really good question, Art. Rain barrels should still be approved with architectural requests. Marianne, thank you for that comment. So that would be something that would go through the CC&R process and would be specific to your community. But it is not against the law to use rain barrels at all. So that would be something that a community would have to make a determination on with regards to their specific CC&Rs if they would allow that. After the expense, what reserves are needed? I see Suzanne asking that question. So that's a real specific question. Maybe you can elaborate if there's a way that I can generally answer that. Suzanne, I'm not too sure on that. We have some mulch questions, which I'll get to on our mulch section. What if, I see Kathleen says, what if your swale areas are above paved drains? Okay, so that is a really good question. Generally, your swale areas should be below drains. There's no way to move water back up into a swale. So that is pretty much a site-specific question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that, but water always moves in the path of least resistance downward. So it's going to be almost impossible to get water from a drain system that is lower than the swale. You can't move water up into a swale area without a pump. So that I don't know that we can actually do that. That was Kathleen's question. I don't know if I answered your question good enough there, but you can always type something back in if you need more clarification. How much, I have a question, how much space is needed for a cistern? Depends on the type of cistern. There are, rain barrels suited for residential use that are, 100 up to a couple 100 gallons. And then you get into cisterns, which can be 500 gallons, 1,000 gallons, even bigger. There are some cisterns that can be stored underground, which would be, a very large project. So there's really a cistern to meet everyone's needs. There are varying sizes of cisterns out there that will accommodate all kinds of project sizes, above ground, large rain barrels and cisterns, and even ones that go below ground. So there's really one out there for everyone. With large grass slopes, should they be regraded to make different levels for water retention? It's quite possible. That's quite a question, great question from Allison. So that is a probably more of a landscape architect would need to be coming in if you're doing large grass slopes, very large areas where you're redirecting a large amount of water and you're doing a large amount of grading. You would most likely want to bring in a landscape architect to help you with some of those calculations and where to move that soil if you're doing a really, really large area. If your grass slope is naturally contouring and sloping and moving water to a desirable area, and you don't have current ponding and you don't have current issues of standing water or anything like that, it might be fine not to do anything with regards to grading, but that's kind of site specific. So I would encourage you to talk to a landscape architect in that case. But large grass slopes, if you want to go ahead and renovate those and turn them into a stormwater retention feature or detention feature, definitely, if they're in a very large area with a large volume of water, talk to your landscape architect. Do you have resources for cost-friendly stormwater retention solutions, Mathia Lamb? Well, you're basically going to need to talk with an irrigation supply house and start looking at some of the options for rain barrels and cisterns if you want to go that route. When you're talking doing some smaller areas within the landscape, it's basically adding a cost for grading and moving topsoil in these small renovation areas. So that would be something that you could get costs from your landscape contractor and potential estimates once you have a plan and you know what you want to achieve and how your area layout is going to look. Your contractor can give you a cost estimate on that. And so you'd want to be in good communication with your landscape contractor for that. And Nod, what's the best way to store water and use in a big landscape? So I think, Nod, thank you for asking that question. If you have a very large landscape and you want to use some of your areas in renovation for storing water and using that as a supplement to your irrigation system, you're probably going to be using a combination of vegetated swales, contours in the landscape and then storing some of that water in cisterns, you're really going to want to talk to a landscape architect. So when you're talking big renovations, just as a general statement, and you're talking large areas, you're talking lots and lots of water, thousands of gallons of water, and you're talking lots of soil moving, you're moving, dozens and dozens of cubic yards of soil, you're going to want to get involved with a landscape architect. That's not something you're going to want to tackle on your own. And that's probably not even something your landscape contractors should tackle on their own. If you're doing a large area and you're doing a lot of soil moving and you're trying to store a lot of water, you need to be in contact with a landscape architect and draw up an actual plan. That's my best advice for you, Anand. Planter I have a Paseo Plaza HOA, is a planter that is sealed to not leak water and effective stormwater retention. A planter that is sealed to not leak water. I don't think so, because the way I'm interpreting that is a planter with no drainage. If you have plants growing in it, the plants will eventually die. Plants need drainage. So you don't want to ever seal any sort of container to contain water that you're growing plants in, because the lack of oxygen will eventually kill the plants that are in there. I don't know if I'm interpreting that question correctly. That was Paseo Plaza. I think that was most of the stormwater questions. I have Winona and Claudia, and then I'll move on to our next questions. Claudia, how can you redirect runoff water that is currently directed down a large grate in the lawns? That must mean crate. She says great, but crate. How do you redirect runoff water that is currently directed down a large grate in the lawns? So that is connected already to a stormwater system, I'm going to infer, because what I'm visualizing is it's connected to a drainage system. That drainage system internally in a common area lawn would be connected to the stormwater system of the local municipality. You would most likely want to contact the local municipality and make sure that you can cap that off and that you have a plan to store it on your site. Again, if you have a very large lawn area, you're going to really need to work with a landscape architect on that, because if you're containing a large volume of water, it's going to potentially require a permit for grading and capping off the large grade in the lawn and so on. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about doing something like that, to contact a landscape architect to have them work with you. And then this will be our last one here, I think. How to create, from Winona, how to create stormwater retention on a downhill narrow strip. Really good question. You have a downhill narrow strip and you want to retain stormwater in that downhill narrow strip. The best way to do that, in my opinion, would be, remember the motto is, you want to slow it, spread it, and sink it. So your first thing to do on that downhill narrow strip is to find some way to slow that water by putting baffles of some kind on that downhill. So there are more flat areas with a stop that allows it to sink in, and then it goes down to like another terrace or flat level that allows it to sink in. And you could do that with minor grade changes and rock placement to try to allow to flatten out portions and semi-terrace that narrow downhill strip to allow that water to slow down and sink in semi-flat areas instead of going straight down. So that would be for the narrow, small area. Theo, are there ways to capture water from storm drains? Not really. So once it enters the storm drain, Theo, it's property of the municipality, so to speak. I mean, it's gone off site. So we really don't mess with the municipality. Our goal is to keep it on our site before it gets to the storm drain. There's really no way to do that. Nat, is a cistern rain barrel use applicable for an HOA complex over 40 units. Absolutely, you can use cisterns and rain barrels on any size project. Okay. Okay, I think I'm going to move on to our next topic. We have a ton of questions here, and I'll try to get back to some of them at the end. But in the interest of moving on to our next topic, I'm going to move on to our next one, but I have all these queued up here. So I'm so grateful you guys are asking questions. And the questions that are not on the stormwater topic, I'm going to scroll back to the top of this and go through these section by section and make sure I answer them in the appropriate section. So our next category is irrigation. And we're on the topic of renovations, and our renovations, we want to make them as sustainable as possible. And one of the goals of having an irrigation upgrade is to what's called lower the precipitation rate of your irrigation system and to eliminate irrigation runoff. Those are the two goals that I identified. What is a precipitation rate? It is the rate at which water is dispersed onto the landscape over a certain period of time. So like when it rains, it's inches per hour. That's the same thing with sprinklers and drip, it's inches per hour. So we want to lower that precipitation rate to allow water to come out of our sprinklers and our drip more slowly, so it has time to percolate into the root zone of the soil so our plants can use it. If we apply water too quickly, it runs off and it's not used by our plant material if it's running down the street. So traditional sprays that you see here on the left-hand side are what were common in use for the last, 2, 3, or 4 decades in the landscape industry. These are very high precipitation rate sprinklers. They're designed to cover areas from about 5 to 15 feet in radius. And they put water out very, very quickly. Most of the time they put water out so quickly the soil can't absorb it unless we have our irrigation timer scheduled in a very specific way to eliminate runoff. It also has the disadvantage of putting water out in a very fine mist. Water that's put out in a fine mist either evaporates or blows away before it hits the plant material. So we have some issues with that in regards to traditional sprays. Technology in the irrigation industry over the last decade and a half has come so far. And one of the things is replacing traditional spray nozzles with what's called a multi-stream rotary nozzle. And what's really neat about these nozzles is they put water out in large droplets in these wands. So it doesn't blow away and it doesn't evaporate. It puts water out at a very slow rate versus a very high rate with the traditional spray. And what's really nice about these is you don't even need to dig up and replace the entire sprinkler. All you do is replace the nozzle. The nozzle is compatible with the spray body of a traditional spray sprinkler. So this is one really cost-effective way to lower irrigation costs, is to change from traditional spray nozzles to multi-stream rotary nozzles. They put water out more slowly. They retrofit right onto a traditional spray head with no digging involved. And the water droplets are large and will not blow away for the most part. They have to run longer because they have a low precipitation rate. So something that you may have been running for 5 or 10 minutes with a traditional spray, it is entirely possible that the multi-stream rotary nozzle has to run for 20 or 30 minutes, but that water is not going to blow away and that water is not going to run off. They're much more efficient at delivering water to the landscape. Your next option for conversion is a overhead spray to drip conversion. And this is for your renovations that you guys are thinking about doing on your communities. You've got to irrigate the plants somehow, even if it is only once per week in LA, right? They still need to be irrigated. We don't have year-round rainfall in California. So you can go with the multi-stream rotary nozzle in your renovation, or you can go with drip in your renovation. I highly encourage, ever so highly, in what's called inline drip emitter tubing. I would stay away from all other drip products myself. These are far superior to anything else out there on the market. All the major manufacturers make some sort of inline drip emitter tubing, and I'm not going to hone in on one specific manufacturer. But what it is, and I think this is a good image, is you lay this tubing out in a grid-like fashion that covers your whole renovation area, and the emitters are already in the line. So you don't have to like punch a hole and stick an emitter and run this like spaghetti tubing that everyone trips over. And when they're raking leaves, it all goes all over the place and then it breaks. The emitters are in the line. So all you do is roll out the tubing in a grid-like fashion, and there are specifications as far as how far apart the emitters should be, how far apart the rows should be. All of that product information is available from the product manufacturer, and it's different for types of soil and different types of plant material. I just want you to get the general understanding of what this tubing looks like and why it is so far much more superior than other drip products. I prefer it because it's easy to maintain. It doesn't break like those other emitters and the spaghetti tubing. It's easy to do maintenance around. People are not tripping over all of these spaghetti tubings. They're not breaking emitters by walking on them. It effectively wets an entire landscape bed instead of one little spot next to the one emitter that got put in by the one tree 20 years ago. It will effectively soak an entire planting bed, and that's what's good for establishing plants and encouraging root growth, is wetting the entire planting area thoroughly to encourage that root growth around that specific plant. I like it because it's easy to expand onto. So if you have a tree that grew, which we all hope they grow, right? You can actually expand the tree rings and expand the drip area as the tree grows and the tree matures. You can add on or move the drip out away from the tree trunk out into the canopy and the drip line where the feeder roots actually are. So it's expandable and you can add on to it very easily. The one thing is the tubing is more expensive. And there is a cost involved, but there's virtually zero maintenance after that point. And if you're renovating a overhead spray valve to a drip valve, you're going to need to install a filter to filter out sediment and debris and a pressure regulator. So every valve will need to have those two additional pieces in order to operate a drip system. So again, these are just like kind of overarching themes and overarching things with regards to irrigation and familiarizing you with some high water use efficiency products that I recommend for your renovations. And one of the goals with irrigation renovations is not only reducing that precipitation rate and putting water out slowly where our plants can use it, it's also to eliminate runoff. So irrigation runoff, so we're not talking stormwater runoff, so we're off the stormwater topic. Stormwater comes from rain. Irrigation runoff comes from human irrigation. It is actually prohibited. You cannot let water off of a project site that comes from irrigation and enter into the stormwater system. It's prohibited, and it's seen all the time, unfortunately. Some municipalities focus on education and making people aware that it's prohibited. Some municipalities focus on enforcement and they issue fines for it. So I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen if somebody drives by your project and sees this, because it's very specific to every municipality, but just know that it is prohibited, and all the way up to fines being issued if this is occurring on a project site. So if you have those high precipitation rate sprinklers and they're not being adjusted and the timing is not scheduled appropriately in the controller, you're going to have situations like this, and you're going to have the potential for runoff. This image on the right here is another one of my favorite images, because this is what I like to call the low-hanging fruit of landscape renovations right here. If you have any of these sidewalk strips with turf in your community, that should be the first thing that goes. No questions asked. These have no purpose in any landscape anywhere. They are inefficient. They are hard to irrigate. They are hard to maintain. There's just no reason for it. This could be a mixed border of low water use ground covers and low growing perennials with inline drip emitter irrigation that would keep this tree watered, and you would not have to irrigate it very frequently, and you would have to maintain it maybe 4 times a year. So that's another reason why I like that image there. And you would have no stormwater or no irrigation water runoff. So that's it for irrigation. Does anyone, I'm sure, have irrigation questions? I'm going to scroll back through to the top of our questions and see if there's any irrigation questions, because I don't want people who asked a question earlier to think I forgot about them. Judy, your question is really great, and I'm going to save that. You were the first question. I'm going to save that for our question and answer period at the very end. And Lois has a good question. I'm going to try to save those turf questions for the very end. Fire resistant plants. I'm going to answer that right now. Aride, Nicholas, what are some fire resistant plantings and fire defensive practices to incorporate in the landscape plan? Actually, I'll answer that at the very end. Never mind. We're going to stay on irrigation, but I'm not forgetting those of you in the beginning. What are good resources regarding recommendations for low and no irrigation plants for varying solar exposure? So JJ, when we get to plant selection and at the very end, I have some resources for plant selection. So I haven't forgotten about your question there. I will bring up a couple resources. Cohesive design for major turf removal. I'm going to look at that one at the end. I'm just looking for irrigation questions. We have a lot of plant questions. What suggestions, Helen, what suggestions can you make for watering once a week? How long? How deep will it go to prolong plant life? That question, Helen, is an irrigation related question. And that's kind of the age old question, is like, what should my watering schedule be? I'm going to refer you to a website, and if you just Google B Waterwise, like BE Waterwise, and then watering calculator, it will come up. It goes to a website in San Diego, and it is a watering calculator, which will help you answer that question. It depends on the soil type. It depends on the type of irrigation you have. It depends on the weather. And it depends on the type of plants that you have. And this Be Waterwise watering calculator takes into account all 4 of those things. You have to enter in those 4 pieces of information, and it spits out an irrigation schedule for you. So that would be my advice for you, because that's a really big question, but it does take into account soil, type of irrigation, type of plants, and weather. You need to know those 4 things in order to answer that question. And that Be Waterwise calculator will take that into account and spit out a schedule for you. Catherine, will this restriction include the stars in LA who didn't do this last year? That's a great question. Your guess is as good as mine on that one, Catherine.
For Tiffany, in terms
Yes.
of questions, they are sorted but from most recent, so, or oldest to
okay.
newest. So if you want to get to the ones that are probably more pertinent to this topic, if you scroll towards like the
bottom?
later third, yeah.
Okay. Soil type. Okay. DG pathways, raised planters. Okay, I answered some of those. Native Plant Society. Are subsidies still available? Okay, so I have a good one from Marianne Monk. Are subsidies still available for irrigation upgrades? Really good question. I'm going to encourage everyone who's going to be doing irrigation upgrades as part of their renovations to contact your local water provider, and they will direct you to any rebates. I'm familiar with the rebates in Southern California, and there are rebates in Southern California available through SoCal Water Smart. And if you're not in Southern California, which some of you may not be, or I'm sure are not, you're going to need to talk to your local water provider or go to their website, and there should be a link on there for any available irrigation upgrade rebates. You can't do a renovation project without checking for rebates first. Theo asks, are there any financial incentives from the state of California to improve landscaping with regard to saving water? So that kind of goes along with the question I just answered on rebates. So it depends on where you are in California, if there is a financial incentive available to you for improving landscaping. And most of the rebate or financial incentives are available in the form of rebates. I'm going to talk just briefly about Southern California because that's what I'm familiar with. I encourage you to contact your local water provider and find out what's available in your area. But in Southern California, there are rebates for those multi-stream rotary nozzles, $7 per nozzle. There are rebates for drip irrigation, 40 cents per square foot of inline drip emitter irrigation. There are rebates for flow sensors that are put on irrigation systems. There are rebates for weather-based irrigation controllers, $50 per station. So if you have a 20 station controller, 50 times 20 would be the rebate for that controller. There are rebates for turf replacement. The current rate in most areas of Southern California is $2 per square foot. If you're in the unincorporated area of San Diego County, it's up to $4 per square foot. So it really depends on where you're located as to what your rebate on your financial incentive would be. And the way I want to frame this is, if you're doing a renovation, that would be one of the first things that I would suggest that you do, is look at the potential to fund these rebates, or at least offset some of the funding, the costs of the project with some of these potential rebates that are available, and to check with your local water provider. Because at this point in time, they're providing these financial incentives in the form of rebates. At some point, you know, they're going to be mandated, I'm afraid. They're mandated already for new construction. So on new construction, you can't build any of these things without all these things that I'm talking about already in today's presentation. They're a requirement under what's called the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance of California. So existing properties, if your renovation is under 5,000 square feet, I believe it's 5,000 square feet, and Muello does not apply, but all new construction, it does apply. So those financial incentives are available from a lot of the municipalities as this financial incentive. And I'm afraid we're going to get to this mandate phase pretty soon, and we're not going to have the financial incentive anymore. So I encourage you to do that. So hopefully that answered your question. Allison, how do we appeal to the homeowners who would rather increase dues to pay for higher water charges to continue to maintain grass areas? That's a really great question, Allison. I struggle with that in my consulting business all the time. You try to explain the facts to them, and there are people that just want to pay higher dues. There's going to come a point where it's going to be mandated that we just don't water at all. So, you know, that's what I'm afraid of. And that's kind of the point that I'm getting to with some of the people that I've worked with in the past, is I'm trying to convince them, letting them know they're using drinking water, okay, for irrigating their turf. That is not a sustainable process. If you Google the article that I brought up, the Los Angeles County or LA Times article about the 1 day per week, and you scroll down to the bottom of the article, the goal of the Metropolitan Water District of restricting everyone's outdoor water use in April, okay, when everything should be green and our reservoirs should be full, the goal is to make sure that they have water for human consumption and human health. Okay, so lawn that's decorative doesn't fit anywhere in human consumption and human health. So, I mean, that was kind of an eye-opening sentence in the article for me, that we're to the point where we're starting to consider human health. That takes precedence to me. So, I mean, I think we kind of have to start talking to some of these board members that are not wanting to get rid of the turf, as you know, it's going to be hard when we're behind the 8 ball here, when we're being mandated to water once a week or water not at all. And we're going to just have dead lawn. We need to get ahead of the curve. We need to retrofit our irrigation. We need to put in waterways plant material now, while there are potential rebates out there, while we still have water available to establish new plants and to keep our trees alive. I'd rather have a tree any day than an unused, non-functional lawn. But there's always going to be someone that wants their lawn. It's a tough thing. But I encourage you to read up on the water restrictions that are going to be implemented in Southern California, and that might give you some good information to talk with that board member. Okay, so I'm going to move on so we don't run out of time. It's already 2 o'clock. I'm just having too much fun, you guys. This is fun. Okay, erosion control. So again, project renovation. If you have slopes anywhere on your project and you're thinking about renovating them, I wanted to dispel a couple of myths with regards to erosion and slopes. People think ground cover is the best thing to plant on the slope for erosion control. That's probably the worst thing you could plant on the slope for erosion control. Ground cover has very shallow roots. Ground cover, especially ice plants and things that are very succulent, absorb water and get very, very heavy. And I've seen ground covers pull slopes down because their foliage gets so inundated with water and heavy. What you really want to look at if you're looking at renovating any slopes is different types of woody plant material, shrubs and trees, maybe a mixture of some perennials and grasses, maybe a little bit of ice plant or ground cover just for color, but you don't want an entire slope of ice plant. You want a mixture of woody plants that have different root depths. That's what locks the soil in. Having different root depths, and woody plants have permanent root systems. They have woody root systems that will lock in and stay in place for years to come, not these little shallow fibrous type root systems that ice plant has. So really look at different types of plants for selecting for erosion control on slopes. When we look at woody plants in different layers and different sizes, so we have trees, we have shrubs, we may have some perennials and some grasses. All of that foliage that's overhead helps to dissipate and deflect the rain, as opposed to just pounding directly on the soil in open patches of soil. So not only are we locking the soil in, we're also dissipating the rainfall and the pelting onto the soil via the foliage. And the goal is to prevent that soil from, coming off our site and soil loss, and increasing slope stability and the integrity of the slope. And that's kind of always the #1 goal. And I always get people asking me about ice plant and what kind of ice plant is the best. And I say no ice plant. So start looking at woody plant material. When you do slope renovations, sometimes you need to have temporary measures in place for erosion control until the plant material establishes. And some of those temporary measures are these straw wattles, which you've probably commonly seen driving around. They are designed to be used temporarily, not permanently, temporarily until plant material is established. Jute netting, which is like this mesh that's laid on the slope, perpendicular to the wattles. That eventually just disintegrates. You wouldn't remove it. And then think about hydroseeding wildflower and native grasses onto slopes. I've seen some beautiful projects with different wildflowers and native grasses in the mixture. You can have special blends made of hydroseed that can be used as a temporary erosion control measure while more woody plant material gets established. You can use these like straw wattles in isolated areas or on the entire slope, which would be jute netting and hydro seeding while those plants are established. And then probably one of the most important things for erosion control is to keep the soil covered permanently with a layer of mulch. If your slope is irrigated, there is nothing wrong with laying mulch on the slope, and that is the best way to prevent erosion control and soil loss, is to keep it covered with mulch if your slope is irrigated. I'm going to keep moving till the end because we're already at 2:05, and I will take all the questions at the very end. So if you have erosion control questions, definitely put those in, and I will scroll through those at the end. Plant selection, which I have a feeling we're gonna have a lot of questions on, and I saw some questions already. So plant material selection. So we've kind of set the stage for our frosting of the cake, right, so to speak. And now we're at the point where we want to frost the cake. We want to plant some plants. What do we choose for plant materials, and what are the goals of these plant choices? And I like to always refer to goals, because we don't want to just make these choices just because we have to make a decision. We need to meet a goal. There needs to be an intent to the choice that we make. What is the intent? And the intent is to decrease the water needs, obviously, but let's look at decreasing maintenance, okay? We want plant choices that don't have to be touched every week or every month. We want plant choices that can be truly low maintenance and generate less waste, right? So not 50 burlaps of cut grass being taken off your site every week. That is an unsustainable process. So what kind of plants are we looking at? I put this buzzword here, Mediterranean climate plants, and what is a Mediterranean climate plant? And this is a very broad topic, plant selection, which we can get fully specific on in another 2 or 3 hour webinar. But for now, we want to determine or define what is a Mediterranean climate plant. So plants for California, if they are from any of these Mediterranean climates, they are well suited to grow in California. Okay, so Mediterranean climates have cool, moist winters, except for this winter. We haven't had any rain, right? They have warm, dry summers. That means they're not used to being over irrigated all summer. Mediterranean climate plants do not like to be irrigated all summer. Okay, that is an important thing. If we can cut our summer watering because our plants don't like or need water over the summer, that is huge for us. They are what are called, many of them, reduced summer water plants. So you're looking at California native plants and plants that are native to Baja California. You're looking at plants that are native to central Chile, plants that are native to the Mediterranean basin, plants that are native to South Africa, the Western Cape, and plants that are native to the south and southwestern side of Australia. So California native plants are awesome, they're amazing, but so are plants from South Africa and Australia. So if we're looking at plants that grow natively in these communities, they're good for California. So you can eliminate half the stuff at the nursery and the garden center just by knowing what a native plant or a Mediterranean climate plant is. A plant that is native to Asia, not good for California. Okay, and a lot of our old landscaping plants that were commonly used by developers 20, 30, 40 years ago, that's where they're native to. Or if they're native to Eastern United States, where they get a ton of rain and it's humid, the Southeast, not a good choice for California. And those are the plants that developers chose to use decades ago. That's one of the reasons why we need renovations, because the plant material choices decades ago is not suitable for what the conditions are on our communities today. So I'm going to give you some resources. You guys are going to have a lot of homework to do with plant selection. I'm not going to just give you a list and say, oh, if you're in Palm Desert or San Anselmo or Fresno, here's your list. Those are 3 completely different communities. There's going to be some homework and some research that need to be done. So when you're talking renovations and you're ready to frost that cake, you need to have a plant palette. You need to have a list of plants that are suitable for your community for the soil, for the climate, for the needs and the aesthetic desire, the aesthetics that are desired in the community for your specific community. Then when it's time to do renovations, it's easy because you just pull lists off the approved plant palette. We know they're water wise. We know they're low summer water. We know the community likes the appearance of them. We know they're available in the nursery because we've done our homework and we've created this community-wide plant palette. When you're creating a community-wide plant palette, it's important to know the sunset climate zone. So you can Google that. What the WUCOLS region is, that's something that your landscape contractor should know and should be able to help you with. This stands for Water Use Classification of Landscape Species, and it assigns a water, it's either high, moderate, low, or very low water use for over 3,500 plants that data has been collected on in California. Turf is a high water use plant as classified by WUCOLS. The New Zealand Christmas tree, which is here, is a low water use plant as classified by WUCOLS. So that is something that is important information. And then knowing the soil type. Soil type is so important when it comes to plant selection. This page here is an excerpt from a book that I'm going to give you a link to the first 3 sections of. It's called Landscape Plants for California Gardens. And I love this book. It is one of my favorite books. And at the beginning of the book in section 3, they have a plant palette around a specimen tree. So you have a New Zealand Christmas tree in your community. What are plants that would grow in conjunction with that New Zealand Christmas tree? And it gives you a list of trees, shrubs, ground covers, perennials, all around this specific tree. And it goes through probably 20 different trees, giving you a sample plant palette. And it gives you, it's probably kind of hard for you to see, but you're going to get the link and you can look it up. What's the plant factor? And these are all moderate, low or very low water use plants. And then IG stands for irrigation group. A 2 means reduced summer water. So these are all plants that do not need a ton of summer water, like turf. That's not on this list because it needs a ton of summer water. This is the rest of the plant palette here. So going through shrubs and grasses and agaves and aloes and succulents that are all suitable to grow around a New Zealand Christmas tree. So that's one of my favorite resources, and I have a link for you on the resource page. You can always go to the nursery and read the labels and talk to nursery people. Go to local botanical gardens also. There are botanical gardens all over California that have a tremendous amount of educational information about the plants that they grow there, and you can see the plants live in a mature state. Sunset Western Garden Book, link to WUCOLS, Calscape and the Calscape Garden Planner are native plant, California natives. Calscape has information on all California natives, and the Calscape Garden Planner, you can just Google that, and I think I have it on the resource page also. It's just California natives, not all Mediterranean plants, but you basically go in and you give it criteria of your project, and it spits out a list for you of plants that would be appropriate for your area and your design style. If you want a more formal appearance, or you want a more native open appearance, it gives you, I think, 4 different criteria that you can select. So have fun with the Calscape Garden Planner. It's a really good resource. And we're at 12:13, so I'm going to go to the very last section, and then I'll do all the questions, because I cannot close this out without talking about my very favorite topic, which is mulch. I love mulch. The goal of keeping mulch on your soil is to reduce evaporation and retain moisture. Any moisture that we apply via irrigation or we get via rainfall, we want to keep it in the soil. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to projects and there's nothing covering the soil, and you stick a shovel in the soil and it's just dead. There's like nothing living in it. It's dry. There's no worms, there's no plant roots, there's no nothing. Some communities just really like having nothing on top of the soil, but it's not good for plants. We want to nourish the soil, and the way we do that is by building a soil food web. All of these microorganisms and worms and critters that live in the soil or should live in the soil is what nourishes our plants to grow healthy. It helps, a healthy soil food web helps to retain moisture in the soil also. It helps to cycle nutrients so we don't need to apply as much fertilizer. A healthy soil will actually, that's covered in mulch, will reduce erosion. It will reduce soil compaction. It helps to improve soil structure, keeping our soil covered in mulch. There are just so many benefits to having mulch. And the one main complaint I get about mulch and mulch going away is that it's hard to rake leaves around the mulch. Well, leaves are nature's mulch, okay? So you don't ever go into a forest and see it raked clean. You see leaves on the forest floor and you see healthy soil food web underneath the soil. So really think about, ways you can keep your community safe and attractive and not have leaves and fruit all over the place. I get that. You don't want to have a safety hazard, but it's okay to leave some leaves. That every leaf doesn't need to be picked up. And if we're not removing every leaf, we're not removing all the mulch at the same time. And then the second comment I always get is the mulch always needs to be replenished. Well, if we work at trying not to remove every leaf, we don't need to replenish the mulch as frequently, is my comment on that. And then the third comment I get is about fire, and organic mulch or woody mulch being a fire hazard. So you have to check with CAL FIRE if you're in an extreme wildland or an extreme fire hazard area that's butted up to a wildland urban interface. There are some restrictions within 5 feet of the home of not having mulch, but that depends on your specific area. And if you fall within that specific zone, you would not be able to have woody mulch within 5 feet of your house. But if you have an irrigated landscape and your mulch is irrigated, whether it's drip or whether it's overhead, wet mulch or moist mulch is not a fire hazard. And there's just so many benefits to the soil. So my advice is to always keep your soil covered in at least 3 to 4 inches of mulch. My favorite type of mulch are woody arborist chips, coarse chips, right from the arborist truck. No need to spend thousands of dollars on mulch from the landscape supply. Just become friends with your arborist. And as long as the areas are irrigated, they are not a fire hazard. I steer people away from dyed mulch that has been dyed a color. That stuff's not the best to use. Bark nuggets is not a very good mulch. Bark repels water. Woody mulch absorbs water. So you want woody mulch because it will absorb and retain water. Bark actually repels water. And I would stay away from fine mulch. You want coarse mulch, coarse chunky mulch. You can always layer compost underneath it if you have dead soil that you don't have a lot of activity of soil food web activity. You can layer compost underneath it and then really try to not rake away the mulch, not pick up every leaf, to keep that soil covered. And it's okay if there's some leaves on top of it. And there's always going to be someone who wants every leaf picked up. I know that, but it's a mindset that we have to start changing. It's just not necessary to have all of that. I'm going to go right into the end where we can get to questions. And where do I start? You really need to start with identifying areas that you think are going to be suitable for renovations. The sidewalk strip turf is my favorite low-hanging fruit for places to renovate in communities. Small, hard to irrigate turf areas. So anything that is a weird shape, that is non-functional, that is not utilized by passive or active recreation, it should go away. And we need to just start changing the mindset as best we can, because these small pieces of turf are just unsustainable. We can't do it. These moderate water use plantings or high water use plantings that are maybe just, past their useful life, they need to be on the list of things to do within a community. Slopes that have erosion, those are kind of all the low-hanging fruit areas that I can think of for communities with where to start with the renovation. Work with your contractors, work with your water managers, work with your landscape architects. These people are resources for you, and will help you get your project off to the right start. I encourage people to plan everything in phases and to start their planning now. I like to call it a master plan for improvements, where you make a goal for each year for the next 5 to 10 years out, where you renovate specific areas each year, and you can budget accordingly each year for specific areas within your entire community, and identify those priority areas for the first couple of years, and then some of those other areas afterwards, kind of these low-hanging fruit areas where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. You're going to see the most savings in water consumption and water bill savings, and you're going to see the most savings in your maintenance bill. So every time you do a landscape renovation and you're putting in low water use, low maintenance plants, you should start seeing savings over the coming months and years in water and savings in maintenance costs. You can budget for improvements if you have a master plan, because it's not going to be like, oh, something broke, we need to Band-Aid it. It's going to be, okay, we're going to renovate this area next year. Let's go ahead and just cap that irrigation and remove those plants and put some mulch, because it's on the plan for next year to improve. We don't need to Band-Aid that temporarily. We just need to communicate that it's on the master plan for improvements already. Look for those rebates through your local municipalities. Work on your community plant palette, and then you get to the point where you're able to draft a request for proposal and get things installed, complete your upgrades, and plan for planting in late November to December. And here's your resources, and I know you're all going to get this via email within the next week, so you can click on all these links right here. And then also those CalScape links that were on the plant selection. So thank you. I don't know if we're going to have time for any questions. If you want to pull some out, Dave, you can.
Okay, well, let me go ahead through the question and answer session and finish this off, and we'll move it forward. If we have a little extra time, we'll go through it. We do have some announcements to go here. First of all, that was a lot of information, and I really appreciate it. But we'll go into the question and answer session. That's sponsored by Kevin Boland Insurance Agency and Land Design, Construction and Maintenance, and the Monster Tree Service. A short reminder to vote for your favorite questions by using the thumbs up. If you go in, you can put some questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to one or two, and then we'll deal with those. Tiffany, you did a good job answering them as we went, so that's good. So just a short reminder to do that, and then if we have any, we can deal with those. But I think I'll go on to the concluding remarks, and if we have time before we go to Connor, we'll answer a couple questions. But I do want to thank everybody for coming today. If you are not a member of ECHO, we'd like you to consider to become a member of ECHO. This year, ECHO has planned more than 60 online events. In addition, we offer a vast array of resources for HOA boards and homeowners, including personalized guidance on challenging issues and a series of educational programs. You can join ECHO by going to our website at www.echo-ca.org and clicking on the membership tab. For those of you who are interested in meeting in person, we are restarting our regional resource panels in May. The first will be May 11th, North Bay panel in Novato. And they'll be talking about mulching, they'll be talking about composting, which is a really interesting and relevant topic now. The Central Coast panel will also be meeting. Their meeting is going to be May 18th in Capitola. I believe they're talking about painting or roofing. It's a roofing conversation. Also, we are excited to invite any HOA board members or former board members to join the ECHO HOA Board Members Club. This exclusive group meets every second Tuesday of the month from 5:30 to 7 p.m. and features a unique opportunity to learn from your peers. It's just the peers, just board members. Please consider joining the club. We currently have 220 members sharing information and knowledge. If you're interested, please click on the sign-up sheet in the packet or email Patty at p.curzette@echo-ca.org. These URLs will be in your packet too. As was mentioned in the survey for the topics, ECHO is considering ways to address rising insurance premiums. Depending on the results of the survey, we are considering creating a captive pool for HOA members. We need to know if you're interested in that. We are not sure at this point if there is something we should be doing, but we are asking to see if there's enough interest in trying to address insurance issues. This concludes our planned program for today. And I want to say thank you to Tiffany for your informative presentation. And again, to our sponsors, and of course, to all of you, the attendees and participants today. I'm going to deviate from the script here, and let's see what kind of questions we have. And maybe we'll take one or two questions. If you could take a minute and maybe vote on the questions, that would be very helpful to us.
I'm attempting to answer some of these via typing.
Okay,
Well,
that's a good way to do it too.
Yeah.
And
I'm just so grateful for all the questions. We just need to not have me talk and just answer questions. I think that's better.
You did a great job. So let's see. The first one is from Louis Godet, and there are 7 people that upvoted that one. So how to manage landscape maintenance company? What is the measure of a good maintenance company? How do you do that?
Lois, so I'm going to just briefly explain. You need to look at your contract. If you're talking about your specific contractor and what's going on your site specifically at the moment, you need to always refer to the contract and ensure you're satisfied with the services that are in line with the contract that you signed. If you're looking to secure a new contractor, it really does depend on your community and what your community needs and or wants. And you're in control. You guys pay the bills. So having your own specifications for landscape maintenance that are specific to your specific community and the desires of your community are the best way to secure a contractor that's going to be in line with what your community wants and needs. That's kind of just a general statement. So depends on if you have an existing contractor or you want to go out to bid and get a new contractor. Existing contractor, review the contract that you already have. New contractor, look at putting together some site-specific maintenance specifications for when you go out to bid to get a new contractor. What's the measure of a good maintenance company? It's really if they're meeting the needs of your community and your plants are healthy and happy, you don't have a ton of plant replacement costs. There's not a lot of negligent costs because they're, things are being broken. You have to understand if you're in an older community that has been landscaped for a long time, and I guess I have to define older, but if it's been a decade or 3 or 4 since your community was landscaped, these contractors are dealing with plant materials that have a lifespan and irrigation systems that have a lifespan. So we need to kind of keep it all in perspective. Everything has a lifespan. And these things are recurring maintenance items and replacement items over time.
Okay, well, we're going to have to move on to try to keep us reasonably on schedule. So Connor, why don't you go ahead? Again, thank you, Tiffany.